Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on MiamiGhostChronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? Good, I hope. Here in South Florida land, everything is wonderful. As you will have seen by some of my previous posts, I'm earlobe deep in summer hurricane weather here in South Florida, which of course, for any of you who've ever experienced, I've always got my fingers crossed for this time of year here in Florida, which is like I say, either hot or hotter. Well, we're in the hotter. As a matter of fact, I've got a thunderstorm going on overhead right now, and hopefully nothing will happen because, I live in an old farmhouse and every once in a while the electricity does its own thing, but I've got my fingers crossed, so there it goes. Anyway, guys, or my dogs bark, you know what that is, that they're wigging out with the thunder. So anyway, guys, today I am so excited about the guest that I have today. And the person is a gentleman by the name of Paul Amirault. Now, and those of you who know that I'm a hypnotherapist will know why I'm so excited about this. Back in 1996, Paul, by the way, he's a Hollywood documentary producer. He found himself in the middle of his own paranormal, supernatural experience, however you want to call it. While he was researching a new TV show, he underwent hypnotic past life regression and was unexpectedly transported to a dark night in 1912. There in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, he saw himself cowering in fear before a massive wall of black steel. As you guess it, the sinking Titanic loomed threateningly over his head. Now, he wrote a book about his experiences, where he shares the story of the research and how he came to find out who he was or who he saw during that April night of 1912, where, of course, it's very famous, but he has what I call that personal view of that horrible night. And the story is a tale of obsession, intertwining lives, and ultimately the healing power of understanding in love. So let me go ahead and bring Paul on. How are you doing today, Paul?
I am great, Marlene. Thank you, and thank you for that intro. That's
absolutely
terrific.
It is my pleasure to have you on today. And we were talking a little bit, and you understand, I'm excited about all my guests, but for me, it holds a special place close to my heart because I understand firsthand how interesting and how it can engulf you when you have that type of experience or that connection that you can make. Especially, I think, when sometimes people kind of don't believe in it. But anyway, before we get to that, Paul, did you ever have any experience prior to this as far as either with reincarnation or anything else that's would be considered paranormal?
Yeah, well, it's, and I think we were talking about that earlier, just the when I was a child, everyone has milestones in their lives, and, we were some Catholic kids growing up in New England, and we had some friends who, convinced us to try skinny dipping in our backyard pool. And it was something that, none of us had ever done. Our parents were there. It was a cookout. And, I happened to, it was a night where they were pretty close, our parents. They were playing cards, so we had this elaborate plan to go in and turn off the lights in the pool so that no one would see us. And during that process, when the lights turned off, I had this really freaky experience where I felt in the darkness like I saw a ship looming over me. And it was like, I don't know how to describe it except that all of a sudden it was like I was looking at this wall of steel in front of me like I was gone, like the pool wasn't there, and got the goose flesh from head to toe, and it was just like, what the heck was that? And then my my eyes came back as, adjusting from, the lack of light, and I realized, no, there was no ship there. That was weird. And then, they convinced me to take off my swimming trunks, and we were being kids, and and I thought about it for a while, like, what was that? What was that? And and I didn't, it just, after a while I forgot about it, to tell you the truth. And it was really only later when I had a regression and I saw that image again that made me go, whoa, this was something that that the regression didn't create out of whole cloth. It kind of dredged it up. And it made me all the more interested to find out what that was.
Exactly. It was like, of all the things that you could think a kid would think, possibly see, that's so unusual.
Yeah, I mean, I lived about, 25 miles or so from the ocean. And if you know anything about New England and Massachusetts, people are very provincial there. You could live your whole life 20 miles from the ocean and never see it. People stay around. So, not that we never went to the ocean, but it's not something that, I was obsessing about or even thinking about. It was just, what is this thing? And where am I? And wow, that was freaky.
So fast forward, did you ever have afterwards as an adult, prior to when you started doing the research for the show into the past life regression?
Another thing in terms of, if we're talking about sort of this deja vu feeling, I would say that I got seasick, so I never really, I enjoyed traveling fast on the ocean, but I never really liked boating in particular. And part of it, I went on a deep sea fishing trip and got terribly sick, but I loved it when the boat was flying, and you feel like you're just, you're flying across the water. But it just was never something that compelled me. I didn't like the beach particularly, so I wasn't drawn to maritime history or, but interestingly enough, I was drawn to communications, and I became a filmmaker when I was 12. My dad gave me, I think I was 12, his old 8mm camera, and I started making movies. Okay. And, I made a movie about the sinking of the Titanic. Actually,
what?
That was
really?
One of my first
when you were that age?
Where it was just, but I know in that case I had seen a movie on television that really, when I saw it, it really kind of captured me, and it was an image from the original Titanic movie in the 50s. So I thought it was really cool, and as a director, I wanted to recreate it. But once I saw this image of Titanic, which I really believed was Titanic, it was night, it was a dark ship on the ocean, I was in the water. I started looking around to see who could I, if I was somebody, who could I be? And, there were only so many people on the ship, and I got this real sense that this person didn't survive. So I did some research, and I mean, the research I did was simply put in the movie A Night to Remember, which was a classic film based on the Walter Lord book. And, I had read the book years ago, but hadn't seen the movie ever. And when I saw it, I started crying during the wireless scenes. I started just sobbing. And it was just weird because I don't cry during movies. I usually, just go, oh man, they're being cheesy. I'm not that type who gets swept away. Or put it this way, to be fair, when I was younger, I wasn't that person. I think as I get older, you get more emotional about
Yeah,
stuff.
I know, but what you're saying is like, oh, that's so sappy. Oh, okay.
Yeah. But as a kid, you're like, this is sappy
Of
as crap.
course. Yeah.
But I just kept crying, and so I thought maybe it was, that there could be some connection, and one of the two wireless operators on the ship did die in the sinking. And so really one of the first things I did, I figured, hey, why don't you go to his hometown? This was, when I was looking into this, it was maybe the late 90s, and the internet had just started, but it was very minimal what you could learn, unlike now. Now you can learn anything about it in person, but back then it was just very limited. So I figured, well, I'm going to, I'm working on a new show about based on the Guinness Book. It was a show that we did for Fox back in the late 90s, and this was, I think, in March or so of 98. And I basically was like, well, let's just, if you are this, if there's any connection to this guy, clearly you'd have a connection to where he lived. So I had never had deja vu or anything. But growing up, I did love, this is a weird thing, one of the places that I really, really loved going to, and as soon as I got a car, I would always go there, was Newport, Rhode Island. Okay. Now, what Newport, Rhode Island is known for, of course, are the mansions and basically the Edwardian mansions, that it was, during that time, it was very well known, and they have cobblestone streets.
Okay.
And cobblestone sidewalks and all of, and the old-fashioned lampposts and stuff. So it was a place that I would just be drawn to again and again and again. And when I got to this guy's hometown, I recognized it. Like, I knew where his school was. Like, I knew I was on the main drag. I knew where he lived in relation to where I was. And as a matter of fact, I was making for a museum in that town that had a very simple exhibit. And my goal was, like, hey, let's see if they have a book about this guy. Yeah, because for me it was just a curiosity.
Right.
So, I went all the way to the guy's town and, had to come in on a cab, took a train to a nearby town. And as I'm coming in, I recognized it, and I'm like, we're here. And the guy's like, yeah. And I'm just like, wow. And it just was so like Newport. It was, the main street was just exactly where I remembered. And what was interesting was the museum was just a couple stops from the old post office, a couple buildings from where he worked, and he used to walk up and down the street all the time he lived in the town when he was employed, a teenager. So that just made me go, wow, there's something real here. This is not just, I went to be like, hey, it's worth checking out. The museum was closed, so I never actually got the book. But just being there and feeling like I knew where he was, because when I was standing on the street looking around, I'm like, okay, his house was up there. He went there and there. And then later, when I looked at maps, I realized I was right. I knew how he got there,
So you were able to, in other words, where he lived was still standing, because I know sometimes a lot of these, even though I know they... No, unfortunately, I think it was in the 40s, or, it's been a long time. That building is gone, and there's completely different, there's a completely different set of buildings, but I was able to find online later some old pictures. Yeah, and I knew that you had to cross the bridge to get to, his street. Right.
And, he lived in a little village, I don't know, a couple miles out of town, out from the center of Godalming where he worked.
Yeah, because that's really how a lot of people. That's how we went by landmarks. I go there and then
Yeah. And I've always been like that in this life too. Like I have one of those brains where I don't usually get lost. I mean, I say that some friends and myself took a road trip a couple weekends ago, and I did find myself getting lost. So that if they listen to this, they'll be like, "Yeah, he never gets lost." But I do have that sense of a rough sense of where things are in relationship with each other.
Okay.
And it was very pronounced with him, So that kind of really led me to go, hey, and I started doing more regressions, and more stuff came out, and and there were that played into with regards to, and I know that we're not talking about the specifics of the story, so I should back up. The gentleman, Jack Phillips, John George Phillips, was the senior wireless operator on Titanic, and he had an assistant, someone he felt was an assistant, but this assistant, quote-unquote, survived. So when people talk about the Titanic's wireless officers, they always bring him up. And his story is the only story that really survived. Jack's did not. But Jack really looked at him as his assistant, and it was his first promotion. And, you know, they had a wireless room that was sort of inside the ship, and it was sort of hidden from the passengers. And Jack didn't like that because on the other ships that he'd been on, there was more access to the deck. And, you know, people would come in, and he just enjoyed sort of being seen. You know, he had a little bit of an ego on him. So he didn't like being buried away on Titanic. And just one weird bit of confirmation I had was, you know, I was seeing this in my regressions. You know, I was seeing the layout of Titanic. I knew, you know, where his room was. I knew everything. And what tripped me up for a period of time while I was doing this was I checked the blueprints of Titanic, and I saw that the room was not where I knew it to be. And it really, really was like, wow, you spent time on this, and it's, you know,
what happened, right?
It's not true. And then what I discovered was that that was where they believed the wireless room to be, but it took James Cameron on a new, you know, like on a hunt, going through the wreck and going deeper into the wreck, had been moved to the center of the ship where I knew it to be, rather than right there on the port where the plans had. And the supposition is that they decided that, you know, window space was very valuable for first-class cabins. And so to waste it on, you know, Marconi's little room, you know, just, you know, they felt that it would be better if they just sort of hid that and could sell those rooms that had windows on the deck. So that was, you know, but again, I didn't know that. I just simply knew where the room was and was really disappointed when
you were thinking, boy, what happened?
You know, so anyway.
And did you ever have, Paul, when was the moment that, let's say you're doing the research, you're doing the past life, but did you ever have this one moment? I want to say the shock moment, which is like, this is it. This was who I was, or this was me, or this is not my imagination.
Yes. Yeah, even though there was all that, you know, the stuff when I went to Godalming, and I really felt like deja vu, which I'd never experienced before, the moment for me, because I was sort of like entertained. I mean, the best way to describe it, I was entertaining this idea that I could have been this guy.
Right. And
it wasn't until, and I can tell you the date too, it was January 2nd in 2003, because I was celebrating my 40th birthday at Disney World in Florida, and my family came, everybody came. It was kind of a big to-do, and the day after New Year's, we ended up, or maybe it was New Year's Day, going to a Titanic exhibit that was there in Orlando. And what I saw were some blown-up photographs, one in particular that had been taken on Titanic, of one of the wireless operators. And what freaked me out was that it looked like me, like exactly like me, from behind. It's the guy was shot while he was sitting there at, you know, working. But there was just this body language, just like looking at it, I recognized myself. I was like, wow, oh my God, that's me. And, you know, another little wrinkle in my story is that even now, Titanic experts believe that photo to be the surviving second officer and not the actual one. But I did a bunch of research that proved to my satisfaction that it was a miscaption, and that you know, that it is in fact the other one. And there are some Titanic experts who, you know, will acknowledge they're not sure, that there's a question about who it is. But I know for a fact it's him because I'm like, it's me. And even family members, I said, you know, does that guy look like anyone you know? And every one of them said, it looks like you, actually. So that to me, said, you're not making it up. You know, that moment, that moment was like, this isn't bogus. This is you. There's a picture. This is proof to you. So,
And you
anyway,
know what?
yeah,
What
so
are
that,
what
at
are
that
the
point, I
odds that
basically
you
drank
go
the
and
Kool-Aid.
celebrate and they have a Titanic exhibit? Huh?
Yeah, yeah. And apparently, I think it's even still there.
Okay.
You know, the photos that were taken, the photo in particular was taken by an Irish priest who sort of was given his trip as a gift, and essentially he just took it from Southampton, where it left in England, and to Queenstown,
Okay.
where he had to get off. And he wanted to go all the way to New York, but his life was apparently saved by the head of his order, who basically said, in no uncertain terms are you to go to New York. We need you back here. So
Wow.
he wandered around the ship, and he took some of the only actual photographs of Titanic. And, he was known to kind of slip into rooms that were private and take photos. He
Nice.
did that to someone else's suite. He slipped into a suite on the promenade deck and took pictures of it, and clearly he didn't know the people there. And, so this was, I believe, a case like that, where he was, he was
He was just
probably,
going around and he was
wandering.
thinking,
Yeah.
because I imagine
Yeah.
what everybody, back then, this was the premier luxury liner, it was an exciting thing to be on that ship.
Oh, yeah.
It was, and how old was he? How old was Phillips when he was
He
on
was
that?
25.
Okay.
And of course, once you discover something like that, you go. He had the bad fortune of celebrating his 25th birthday on Titanic.
Oh my God.
It was one day into the voyage, and he didn't really get to celebrate. He didn't want to, make a fuss about it, and I think he was planning a pretty good celebration for himself when he got to New York, which didn't happen. But that's another weird thing, honestly, and I can tell you this. And this is one of those weird things. All of my life, 25 was the end zone. Like when I was a child, when I was a teenager, I was convinced I would not live past 25. 25 was going to be the end. And as a matter of fact, even though I graduated film school like when I was 22, my attitude was, what are you going to do? You're going to move all the way to California and just so that you can die?
For 4 years
And,
more?
Yeah,
Wow.
and miss your family and miss your mom and all that. So basically, I stayed in Boston for like
So
3
you
years
really,
after
really
school.
thought that this was
And it-
going to be it?
Yeah, and then once I hit 25, and then 25 in a couple months, I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to be dying at 25. I guess I can go. And then it was in like March or April of 1988 where, and I was 25 in like 3 months or whatever. I decided to, move, come to California just to see whether I could live here. And then a few months later, in June, I moved permanently. But yeah, I literally put off moving to California, which is something that I wanted to do most of my life, because I felt like, what's the point?
Then that's a very unusual thing when you're in your 20s. Because usually it's the other way around. When you're that age, you think you're invincible.
I was convinced I wouldn't live past. Like I was just, like when I remember, and this is corny, and it also will date me, but I remember when Billy Joel's "Only the Good Die Young" was on the radio, and I was all like, it always made me sad, and I was like, because my brother would argue whether that I was good enough to die at that point, but
it's like, no, don't worry, you're not going to die.
Brother, yeah. He's like, as a matter of fact, he said to me one time, well, if only the good die young, you'll live to a ripe old age.
It's like, yeah.
But that we used to just be really rotten to each other.
But
so.
you know what? When you think about it, of all the things of a prior lifetime, obviously besides the trauma, it would be somebody at that age that realizes, because this was not a sudden end of life where all of a sudden this was that you knew you were going to die.
Yep.
And you were only 25, so you think of all the possibilities. You said, I'm never going to have that chance to experience those things.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I just really did. Like, I felt like it was this premonition, and it was really strong. So that's why, I mean, I had friends, like everyone after college pretty much moved right away. Like if you have a film degree, it's burning a hole in your pocket. Right. I had friends who had moved here and were working. So it was just like, but there's that part of me that was like, well, really, what's the point? And I sort of made a deal with myself that if you live past 25, then you can go. And then that happened. Now, truthfully, I didn't put all that in the book because, well, you know why? Because it's maybe it's my TV writing, my documentary experience is that at a certain point, you're trying to tell a story for a more general audience, and you don't want to just completely bore them. But that was something that it wasn't until all the pieces came together that made me go, well, that's why you believed you were going to die when you were 25, and that's why all of your life you've never really loved your birthdays. When people make a fuss, you go, because obviously if someone went through an experience of having kind of a boring birthday and then dying tragically 2 days later,
if it ever was, obviously he knew how old he was, but if it's ever more like, I just celebrated my 25th birthday and that's it. This is the end of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a terrible thing. That's just a really terrible, tragic thing. And there was a lot of tragic stuff. And I think that for me, personally, a lot of this life has been kind of an answer to his because, I tempered, I had the same level. I have and had the same level of, really wanting to get out there and see the world and do stuff. It was a big deal for Jack to leave his little town and his job at the post office, where he could have done that forever.
Right.
But to, go, I don't know, maybe hundreds and hundreds of miles away to Liverpool to train to be a wireless operator and then get on ships and spend his life traveling the world. That's a big move.
Yes.
And it's not so different, really, to growing up in New England and moving to California. Yeah. And so, I share his appetite to see the world. And actually, it's a curious thing because he saw a lot of Europe and he saw, and he was very fascinated with America because he would come here, but he couldn't really visit. And he never really traveled across the country. So for me, I'm very interested in America, and most of my travels, I've barely gone internationally, and most of my travels have been here in the country to see all the parts of it.
It makes you wonder if at some point when he was going, maybe he thought, man, I should have stayed close to home, and none of these things would have happened to me.
Yeah, there were a couple of those turning point moments in his life. There was a special young lady that he met in Ireland that he could have stayed for. And that he really, I think, was the love of his life, but she sort of stood in the way of his plans. He didn't want to be trapped, in the middle of to him, it was just akin to being stuck at home. And unfortunately, had he made a different choice, he probably would have lived a very long life, and then there were moments like that. Where,
the shoulda, coulda.
Exactly. And even because when he sort of went back to shipboard service, he had spent 3 years in Ireland. And it was, for him it was tough because he was jealous of his friends from school who were getting really good assignments, and he had a good taste of it prior to taking to this job. So while it was considered a plum job within the company and it paid better, it was a real boring place, and the trade-off was just you were stuck somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Beautiful, but in the middle of nowhere in his mind. And so he went back to the sea working with one of his schoolmates, and the trouble was they clashed, and he made it clear that he didn't want to continue that arrangement. And he was looking for other postings. So had he not fought, he could again have missed the Titanic. So I look.
It was all the possibilities, that you could extrapolate. So many. And he was, because the title of your book is, he was the one that sent the SOS. Then, as far as
yes. Mm-hmm.
And
the SOS was something that. I don't know that I go into it as completely in my book, but one of the things people, I don't know are always aware of is that, the wireless on Titanic was, at the time, some people refer to it as a curiosity, but it really was kind of like the Tesla of its time.
Okay.
It was a brand new technology that was very expensive, only for rich people.
Mm-hmm.
And, the company, the Marconi company, rented the room on Titanic. Basically, they owned it, and they charged a premium for their messaging.
Wow.
So if you had enough money, you could send a telegram, and, they pretty much called them Marconigrams, while a ship was at sea. But the thing is that they didn't take too kindly to their competition, and the reality is that, Jack was very focused, and Marconi had for years, since they pioneered this technology, they used a different code. It was called CQD. And, essentially the translation of it was basically like, attention everyone, or shut up, and then, distress. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
It was like, clear the deck, we have a problem. And they kind of used that. The Marconi guys would use it on their ships, and they were taught it. At the time, the Germans were trying to sort of regulate all of radio, and they came up with the SOS signal, which they felt was easier to understand, and people in other languages, like it's a repeating thing. It's,
Mm-hmm.
Da, 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 like the Close Encounters music. You can't not, it would be recognizable as a sound rather than having to know English.
Exactly.
So, so a long-winded answer of saying that, yes, he did send the SOS because the younger guy reminded him, hey, this is the new international signal. But by and large, he was sending CQD, which was the Marconi signal.
And what sense did you get? I mean, there's been so many versions of, what happened that night, whether they underestimated really exactly how much danger they were in. Like, in other words, they took their time. Besides the fact that there was not enough lifeboats, but still.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that
Yeah.
your impression with him was at the beginning maybe the same thing, that everything was going to be okay, and then it turned out not to be?
Well, I think he was particularly rattled. I think the crew had a little bit more of a sense, because he was a little bit more rattled because of the, when you're traveling the ocean, the sound of the ship is ever present. There's it's like a white noise, and it's always there.
Right.
And when they turned off the engines and they're just floating in the middle of the ocean, that silence was very unsettling for him. And he had and also, there was some sloping, in the Marconi room. Like he was pretty, and he was of course tied in. He knew earlier than most that there was a danger, because the captain had come in and, wanted to just make sure they were on alert before sending the message, and basically told them flat out to tell people we're sinking by the head. So Jack, unlike the passengers who might not have been experienced, they might not have known that a ship, a massive steamship with the engines turned off, floating in the middle of the ocean, is not a good thing ever. I don't think they knew that.
Wow. That is, and I think that, and that illustrates the point of what you say, that somebody like him understood maybe only too well. Okay,
Yes.
there's going to be a lot of people that are going to die, and I hope I'm not one of them.
He did, and also too, what frustrated him, and it was and again, I think this is something that is maybe less known in Titanic lore.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Jack was a slightly more conservative person than, a quite more conservative person than I am. And he was very offended because right around the time that the ship left was a real intense period of unionization.
Okay.
And there were strikes that constantly interrupted his schedules, and he was not happy with them. And there was a major coal workers strike that was happening right up to and including the voyage of Titanic. So because it had been announced to the press, and they had sold a bunch of tickets, White Star didn't cancel the launch. They just simply put all of their other ships on ice at port and took all their coal so that they could run Titanic across the ocean. Wow. And I think when Jack realized that they were sinking and there wasn't a lot of radio traffic, he connected the two. That like on any given day, the Titanic disaster could only have happened if the sea was empty. On a typical voyage, he is hearing messages every 10 minutes from other ships. That ships are passing in the night. It was like a highway.
That's incredible.
But it wasn't a highway that night, and that is where the problem was. And he sort of set his anger, his fury, if you will, towards the strikers who had caused this in his mind.
Well, of course. I mean, if you think about it, because it's like, if they would have normal ship traveling around, whether they were commercial ships or whatever, chances are that they would have had a better chance of rescue.
Oh yeah, and that was what people always forget about, is that Titanic only showed the Titanic's. Sadly, it was a cluster, in every sense of the word, because of the fact that the ocean was like that, because you couldn't go 10 minutes without another ship, a half hour max. On a typical time, you had all these companies. They were big ships, little ships, and all that. Because of that, they didn't feel they needed. They couldn't imagine a scenario where a ship would be alone on the ocean.
Exactly.
So they never thought of the lifeboats as anything but ferries. In other words, send them down, send them over to that ship.
Right.
They get off there,
disembark them,
them
then
back.
send them back. Okay.
Yeah. It was supposed to be for offloading only. It wasn't. Ferrying only. Not, we're going to put you on a little boat and leave you in the ocean, because that's the other thing, is that, again, 99 out of 100 times, you won't have the North Atlantic looking like a mill pond, to quote the Cameron movie. You won't have just a quiet, calm, because, you try to put people off into boats in normal times or in a normal April in the Atlantic, they're going to turn over and everyone's going to drown.
Exactly.
It's So yeah. But that was the thing that I think people don't really remember, is that and they blamed the greed of the White Star Line, but they really couldn't fully conceive of being away from help and needing to offload everybody and having it be feasible to do so.
Right. Almost like the same thing along the perfect storm idea, where everything that could go possibly wrong or be in the wrong place or timing, that's what happened.
Yes, absolutely. And, there in Titanic, there was a little bit of a kerfluffle before it sailed, where the captain was not really so happy with the crew, and he wanted to bring someone he had worked with before on. And so what that meant was he got rid of, his chief officer and replaced him with someone that he liked and had worked with a lot. And the first officer left. Now, of course, the first officer swore on his deathbed that he didn't take his keys, which, just to say screw them as he walked off, but he ended up taking his keys as he walked off. One of those keys was to the cabinet where the lookouts' binoculars were.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So he took the keys, and on the ship, it was a brand new ship. It had all this woodwork and all this molding, and nobody wanted to break the lock to get at the binoculars. So you had, in an icy April, the guys up on the thing without binoculars, and that was a difference maker, a huge difference maker.
Of course. What?
So yeah. Yeah, and Jack had some culpability in it too, and that's I don't want to deny that, because he was again sending his high expensive traffic, stuff that he was paid to do, and he got interrupted by a ship that was in the area that had shut down for the night, and just sort of instead of the guy didn't follow protocol. Jack was kind of a little bit of a stickler for detail. And normally it's sort of like, I tell people, it's like in the old days when they had fax machines, and you'd have a cover sheet that comes with it that says, to this person, from this person. So the Marconi way was to, and the guy was working a Marconi thing, but I don't think he was as well trained as he should have been. But the bottom line is, when you wanted to get a message to a ship, using these channels, you addressed the ship, and you made it clear that you had a message from your captain to the captain of the Titanic. Like there was something, it was called the Master Servicegrams.
Okay.
And, you would basically say, Master Servicegram, Titanic, from, Master of this ship. So right away, it triggers the person saying, oh, okay, this is important, instead of just, hey, how are you doing, which is what this guy did. And the guy basically just, he thought it was just, a bored operator just trying to gossip. And so he wasn't really paying attention, and it was interrupting his work. And sadly, this was a ship that could have made a difference. It was very close to Titanic and the guy was working alone on the ship. And since the Titanic really wasn't talking to him very much, he just basically went to, he turned off his thing and went to bed, and unfortunately missed all the SOSs. And thus they did not help anybody. So Jack had some role. He has some culpability in what happened, but honestly,
there was a lot of things that sound like they were not
loyal. Yeah, no, it was. Think of it. There's the strikers. There's no binoculars.
I know, it's like,
yeah.
And people don't realize that out there it's really dark.
Yes.
In the middle of the
funny,
ocean.
Yeah.
There's no ambient light. There's nothing.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly. It is true. It is totally true. And on that, I mean, that's the thing. A moonless dark night. You're flying blind. And those guys were going fairly fast. Like I can't speak to. I mean, I can say this, and I didn't put this in the book either. A lot has been made of the villains on the ship, and in particular, Bruce Ismay, the managing director of White Star Line. But in Jack's dealings with him, because he did a couple times come and bring messages to the wireless room, he was very nice. He was a very nice guy, and he did not seem to be the mustache twirling villain that he's been made out to be.
Exactly.
So I don't know, and and there's an Irish writer who has a theory that that a fire in the coal thing
yes, I've heard
really
of that.
Causing damage. Yeah, and then other people point out that where this guy basically presented evidence that you could see that it's damaged the hull because he found some old pictures of Titanic before the launch, and others are saying that's nowhere near the bunker. He got a lot of press from the story, but it's most likely a blemish on the film rather than
something like
movement.
that the coal kept burning and they weren't aware that it was still burning or something like that.
Yeah. So but basically meaning that they wanted to burn it out. That they basically were trying to empty that bunker. The bunkers where they kept the coal. It's kind of like the storage units.
Right.
And that the coal had combusted in there because it's highly combustible, and it was burning not in the boiler. So the thinking was that they were pumping more coal from that bunker in an effort to drain it and put out that fire. So they were maybe putting more coal in than usual, which obviously means that the engines were going to go faster. So so that's the theory, and that could still be true, but the damage that is supposedly been talked about, I don't know is true, and it's nothing that Jack was aware of,
Let me ask you, Paul, once you started getting into the research, did you start having dreams, or was it only under hypnosis that you were revisiting?
I think I'm at the place now where I can sort of, I can go there anytime I want.
Sure.
And even, but I sort of, I don't know. Other than reaching back for healing purposes, I've talked about this on this other interview that I had done, but I've since sort of done meditations where I've sort of been, where I've tried to show Jack, to show him my life, if you will, to just say, it's a terrible thing you're going through, but just know that there'll be other sunsets. Know that this isn't the end. You'll be back to maybe help what he went through. So I feel like I reach out to be like, and I know how crazy that sounds, but
no, I know to a lot of people Unless you've had that experience, and
Yeah.
and of
Yeah,
course
yeah,
that you
yeah.
get
No,
over
it's right. Otherwise, yeah.
that roadblock of like, oh, my soul or my self-awareness, however you want to look at it,
Yeah.
survives and goes on and takes on another
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people can't wrap their heads around that.
No, no, exactly. And so then it makes it sound like, oh, you're making it up. Oh, Paul, so you're having a meditation where you think you're talking to this guy or that you're communicating with him, but you're really not. And yeah, but I kind of know the difference, And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I feel like it's the least that I could do for him. That was kind of that was sort of the healing part at the end of my journey with the book was to realize that if I can see his life, it's very possible that I can impact his too, and maybe take away some of that horror.
Well, you know what? I think the fact that you lived beyond 25, that right there,
Yeah.
it's like you're good. You're good. You're good right
Yeah,
there.
no, I was going to say, hey, I'm 55 this year. I'm 55, and and yeah, that was, believe me, at 12, at 17, at 22, even. That was not would not even have been on a and now it's like, oh shoot, I actually am old.
And that's the thing that
Yeah.
that to have that expectation that you're only going to live to the age of 25 is very unusual. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that
no,
means that was very
for me, and
deeply
it
embedded
was
in your
so
psyche.
specific too. It wasn't 24 or you'll never live past 30.
Uh
It
huh.
wasn't any. It was just this random number that
Wow.
only clicked once I figured it out. It was like, oh well, that makes sense. No wonder So
Yes.
yeah, so there were just too
Yes.
many of those moments in the process, and I think I tell people that where when they're like, so you really believe this?" And I'm like, "I really do," but because the alternative is just one amazing coincidence after another. Like, it's like
Let me ask you: have
recognize.
you
Yeah.
were there? And it doesn't sound like you did, but because it doesn't sound like you really had any fears or phobias as a result of that. But has anything changed in your behavior after you did that regression? You made that connection.
Yes. Yes.
What happened?
No, there is. Actually, there is something, another little weird, odd thing, and it was very healing. And I certainly didn't connect the two. But, another little weirdo thing about me is that I would hate if I were going to, like, a skyscraper,
Okay.
like visiting some high building.
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely freaked out. Like to have me walk from like a car to the front door across the sidewalk, knowing the building is looming over me. I couldn't look up. Like the first time
Really?
I did, I was like, "Oh my God!" And it just gave me this terrible feeling of vertigo. Now, oddly, when I'm up on the top of the Empire State Building, I have no problem. I can look down and be like, "Oh wow, this is great." But
Uh
I had a
huh.
weird issue with being under a tall building, in the
Wow.
shadow of a tall
It's in
building.
the shadow.
And once I saw this thing where Jack resurfaced, and he was just a couple feet from the hull of the I think the taken apart Titanic, like the back half was still afloat.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up just a few feet from that, and it scared the bejesus out of him that he didn't
Okay.
expect see the ship there, and it was
Mm-hmm.
massive, and it was looming over him, and he felt like it was going to fall on him.
Okay.
So that
Wow.
terror that I experienced in the regression, after I looked at it, then suddenly I realized, hey, I, so now I can walk in the buildings and I can look up and go, wow, that's cool, and look at the architecture. But it was nothing that
Okay.
I could really do until I saw the regression.
And it wasn't
And
a
it,
height thing. It was the perspective
yeah.
of when you saw it looming over you. How
Yes, it
interesting.
was a perspective of the feeling that you're looking up at this massive thing that could come crashing down on you.
And you know what, Paul? It's really interesting because, like I explained to you as a hypnotherapist, I had always people ask me, oh, is it real? I said, well, I'll tell you what. The results I've seen are real. When people
Yeah,
do that past life regression, especially when they've got exactly like what you described, inexplicable phobia, stuff that they just weird out. They can't understand why it doesn't where it comes from, and they can't get
yeah,
around it. You know what? They have these breakthroughs that it works. It's like,
yeah,
okay, so whether it's real or not, which I think it is real, But it works.
Mhm.
People's
Yeah.
come back and something that for some reason they could, and some of it could be quite severe, by the way. All of a sudden
Oh
it's
yeah.
gone.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's true. I heard a story like there was one guy that I went to see, but I chose not to kind of continue with him. He was a regressionist, and he
Hmm.
told a really interesting story of something. And he was very concerned about things not being audio taped. And at the time, I was, God, I've been doing all this. I want to document it. Like
Hmm.
that documentarian in me was like, I
Yeah.
don't want to do these regressions and not have some way to reference them. Like
Right.
you know, if I'm gonna, like, because we all know that memory changes. And anyway, but he told me this really cool story about someone he had, just like he had said was in the previous session, who had this, he had the obsessive compulsive disorder of hands washing.
Okay.
And he talked about being, some official, like in a European city during the Black Death, and he had to, his job was to, you know, basically manage these scenes where all these people were killed and burned the properties, and he had just, had a very traumatic thing happen where he had to kind of, there were sick people and they were still alive, but he ordered them to burn down this village just to get rid of the disease, and and then he went and washed his hands from it, and so so anyway, and then he said that he said typically when people have breakthroughs like that, then suddenly
Hmm.
those behaviors stop because they realize that they're being and again, whether it's true or not, it just recognizing that does make a change. And
Well,
for
I'm
reasons
going to
that
tell
make
you a
no
story
sense.
along those lines, and it was honestly right now I can't remember the source. But anyway, it was something that started out where there was a couple that they were coming in to stop smoking for with hypnosis.
Hmm.
It worked great on her, but with him, he reduced, but he just wouldn't be able. He couldn't stop smoking, and
Yep.
the
Yep.
hypnotist was thinking, okay, there's something here. There's more to this
Hmm.
than what's going on. So
Hmm.
they went ahead and they did a past life regression. And I can't remember exactly what time period it was, but to make a long story short, it came down to that at one point he had been taken prisoner, and I want to say in the military.
Hmm.
And they had gone to supposedly to the, where they shoot you, they put you up against the wall and they say, that one last, what's
Oh, gotcha,
the
gotcha.
last
Right, like,
smoke? Well, this is exactly
yep.
what they had offered him, you know, your
Yep.
last
Yep.
cigarette. And
Yep.
supposedly
Yep.
the hook for him of not being wanting to smoke or stop smoking was that in that past lifetime, at the end of that cigarette, he was going to
Yeah.
die. He
Like,
was going to get shot.
yeah. 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 Right. No. No.
So
No. That totally makes sense. That
once
absolutely
they
makes sense.
got
I get that.
beyond that he relived
Yep.
that scene, that moment
Yep.
where he was offered his last cigarette before getting shot. That was
Yep.
it. He was able to stop smoking, but that was what kept him on that hamster wheel. Well, he would not give up to smoking.
Yeah. 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 Wow. No, that's understandable. And again, you're right. It's those little things. Those. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where it's just like
Very
you
heavy
could go.
emotional moment.
Yeah. I
High
can imagine.
stressful and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why there's a lot of people that a lot of times by the time, well, in your case, you were already having these little incidents. You just didn't know how to tie them in. And a lot of people go to the
Yeah. Yeah.
hypnotist though by the time they're like sometimes when they have severe stuff that hasn't worked any way out and it's usually because something happened to them with a really intense emotional, and I hate to say it, it's usually tied into anger, fear, or
Yeah.
right before you die. Those are the things that
Yeah.
stay with you for some reason.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I can understand that because those are powerful. And for Jack, like that was his last view of Titanic, and it was scary.
Wow.
Like the idea that you're alone, you're this little bug in the water, and there's this ship that clearly has come apart and could easily just capsize on you. Like what's holding it up and
Yes.
straight? That is a terrifying thing to see.
Yes.
And and for me, it did. There was obviously a click back to it. When the first time I went to the city and looked up at a building and got like this weird vertigo feeling.
Mhm.
With but yeah, it was totally odd. It was like I would just be like, okay, here I am, and I would just look down because as long as you're looking down, you're not going to see anything that's troubling. So I would do that. I would just like keep my head low, and I'd make a beeline right in.
Wow, that
And then
is
once I was in, I was fine. which is it's
Exactly.
really
That
weird.
speaks volumes. It wasn't a high, and a lot of people, I'm sure, when you go on a cruise ship or you've been out on any boat in the middle of the ocean, you realize you're
Yeah.
like nothing out there. So I can
Hmm.
imagine
Hmm.
being in the water with this huge
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
monstrosity
yeah,
looming over
yeah.
you. God, that's
Yeah,
horrible.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and he was freezing too. There was a bunch of things
Yeah.
that were going through him, but it was just, he was pulled under with the sinking bow, and, when he felt it was okay enough to let that go, he did rise and saw the ship, and it just really flipped him out.
Wow. It's like,
So,
but anyway, Paul, you told me earlier before we started recording that you are now working on a second book, but this one's going to be
yes,
fiction. And can you talk about
yes,
that?
yes.
Not spoiling.
Well, without spoilers, it's a. I guess I've been like I think a lot of people the last year and a half or so, kind of been rough, for liberal-minded folks, let's say,
Hmm.
and I was sort of compelled to, I came up with an idea, or I should say a theory, that might
Okay.
explain kind of what's going on in this crazy world that we're
Yes.
living in right now.
Hmm.
Why behaviors that haven't been seen in years are suddenly back. And
Yes.
so without spoiling the idea,
Okay.
it does relate to the past life phenomena, that I will say.
Okay.
I sort of came up with, well, okay, so this is an interesting idea. How could you express this? Well, and I came up with a scenario.
Hmm.
It's set just a few years in the future, so it's a
Okay.
police procedural, and it involves an FBI agent who is trying to, basically there's a rebellious group that is causing trouble
Okay.
and killing people, kind of Antifa plus, if you will.
Okay.
And this
Okay.
guy kind of comes in to stop them, and he sort of gets his idea to try to get to the heart of what they're doing and what they're up to. And he will, so he gloms onto the sister of, he's undercover, so he
Hmm.
poses as the boyfriend to the sister of someone who's in the group, and tries to weasel his way in to figure out what's going on. So that's, I think, probably as much as I will say. I wrote it as a suspense thriller,
Okay.
where it's just, and it's written from the point of view of this guy and his transformation as he kind of figures out what's going on.
But you
And
said that you told me there's a little bit of smidge of paranormal in there, right? In the mix, a little bit?
well, yes, the paranormal relates to the what we've been talking about. The
Okay.
idea
Okay.
of past lives. I will lives figure into this book quite largely.
Okay.
So yeah, so I figured that, and I'm writing it under. And I should say this right now. I'm planning to publish it under a pen name only because I want to reserve my name for sort of the nonfiction stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a book about energy healing that I still want to do. I'm
Okay.
about 9 chapters in, and I kind of paused to write this other one. So
Okay.
I'm gonna publish this under a pen name just because
Sure.
it's like that other part of me, and I do draw from my experience doing crime shows,
Mm-hmm.
so I feel that it's fairly accurate, and it's exciting. I mean, it's a page turner. So
Well, you know what? And
yeah.
and I think, and we've seen it in the past. I think despite, I think that as far as, let's say, for entertainment and for books or for whatever, I think that humans want to react almost against, we're being inundated with so much technology and cameras and stuff
Yep.
that
Yep.
I think that we gravitate towards the in other words, the paranormal or the psychic or the
Yeah.
supernatural or the
Yeah.
something where the unexpected or something that can't be measured is introduced into the
Hmm.
story, because everything nowadays is like you're monitored, cameras are everywhere. Everybody's got a camera, with their phone.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that human beings, I even think that that's, you get all these people that are into these, these online games, whether they're World of Warcraft or all these other things. I think that's almost like
Hmm.
escapism
Yeah. Sure.
because,
No, absolutely, and I think people are interested in that
yeah,
because you're right. Everything does seem to be, And even like, for instance, I know it's funny that I'm in some writers groups, and they were all talking about that. When you think about the books that you read when you were a child or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and I know from the TV work and from the dramatic stuff is that emails and texts and phone calls aren't really interesting. They're not.
No.
But that's how we all communicate. So
Yes.
when you think about it, a lot of authors are just sort of throwing that away and having people actually just interact. And
I think it's a wonderful
but
thing. It's like,
I embraced the technology a little bit, but I tried also to
oh
use
yeah.
use it to my advantage in this. But yeah, it's true because something has been lost. I mean, just
Well,
it's like when you think of great writers, and they you hear that they wrote letters, love letters, and after they die, they're all published. It's like, well, what exactly exists now? Like we
exactly.
communicate via emails, and if we say we were on SBC Global, and suddenly we don't have that email account anymore, and it's gone.
That's
All of that
it.
information is gone.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly. And yeah, because before, yeah, people would keep letters and
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So you would have kind of a history. You'd have a way to look at presidents and famous people and writers and to really get inside their heads with how they communicated. And now, yeah, like I said, you could have. I mean, has written the greatest set of love emails, via AOL.
right.
But I mean, where is that ever? No, nowhere.
Well, and
So, well,
like I said, it's like I think that a lot of the you see it because let's face it, nobody wants to be eternally, like I said, I'm not anti-technology. I'm very much technology, believe me. I love my phone and I
yep.
tell everybody, I was born here and raised in Miami, and I remember when I was a kid, would have AC on in the bedrooms at night, and now I'm a crybaby if I'm not in the AC right away because you get used to all these neat things.
Yeah.
In other words,
Right.
when I was growing up, we had window, when you had like
Well,
the
yeah,
window
no,
units and
exactly.
stuff.
Right. It's like that concept of actually opening a window. Yeah, no, you totally get that, and that,
Yeah.
and I do that here too in
I mean, I
California.
know that
as
air
yeah,
conditioning, but what I'm saying is, when you get
yeah,
used to the good part of it, it's great. But at the
yes,
same time, and
yeah,
I think also because the technology seems to be advancing so quickly that I don't care. Even though the teenagers seem to get everything real quick,
yep,
I think it's inevitable. You kind of feel like sometimes left behind because there's too much going on too quick, and
yep,
I think that that's why you see sometimes um, some of the interest in other stuff that's not quite so. I don't know how, because the thing I think with technology is that everything can be measured and determined and, found and read and examined, and everybody wants the X factor, the unknown, and
yep,
um,
yep.
because
Yeah, no, that is true. That is a good point. I mean, and I've heard snarky skeptics say, "Isn't it funny how they used to find ghosts all the time until security cameras and until everyone had a camera, or they used to see UFOs all the time until everyone
right,
had a camera in their pocket, and then all of a sudden crickets, and it's like." Yeah, so that could play into it, but I mean, not that I think that's true, but I've heard that from people, that our wired world has become a highly skeptical and suspicious world, and and the way I look at it too, like with my stuff,
hmm
I have some wonderful friends that that the way I look at it is, I promoted my book, but if it's a subject matter that doesn't like you could know me and never know that I believe this. I'm sharing this story, I think, for people who might be facing some weird things in their own life, and with an encouraging face to say you should explore it.
yeah,
But I don't thump it on anyone because it took me 12 years to believe it, and
yes, yes,
so
and that's what I say. You know what? Personally, even like you said, if nobody ever believes you, let's go down.
yep,
For you, it doesn't matter because you know what you know and what you felt,
yeah, yeah,
and that's all
yeah,
it takes.
yeah,
That's all
right.
that matters. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if those and in this day and age, people are interested in certain things or they're not. So and there's no judgment there. It's like, hey, if people are interested, great. I'll be happy to share. But I'm not one of those people, one of those zealots who are singing from the rooftops. Like oh, everyone has to do this, because I think probably there are some people that shouldn't do it. That
No.
one shouldn't do it as like just a fishing expedition because it can be intense, or at least. But if you're moved to, it means there's something blocking you, and it means you should. That it's
Yes.
that's how I look at it about it. But I don't just tell people, oh yeah, my God, you guys should look at your past life stuff. It's amazing because.
And you know what, Paul? Based on my own experience, sometimes people, it could be like a big letdown, because when you give instructions like, let's see the most appropriate lifetime, they might miss it.
Yep.
They might be
Yep.
expecting, number one, they might think they lived either to be famous or in some great place or something very dramatic. And it turns
Yep.
out that it was a real dull life. But there's a message
Yeah.
there, but that's not what they're expecting. They thought that they were going to have some riveting,
Yeah.
dramatic life, and it was
Right.
like, that's it.
And you're like,
that's it.
Yeah, like the old the woman that whose tapes I use. She had a great thing on her website. Her name is Mary Elizabeth Raines, and she was terrific. I just used her CD and got a lot out of it. But she used to say that people are depressed when they find out that they were a potato farmer with arthritis.
Ordinary. What's worse than being ordinary?
But here's the thing. Yeah, but here's the thing, though. I think you hit the nail on the head. What is one's intention going there?
Yes.
If it's to find out I'm Cleopatra, you probably will be disappointed.
Yeah.
But as you said, you're targeting these lives for the message that they need now. And if they're open to the message, then they will welcome the information. That's, I guess,
Yes.
how I look at it.
Yes.
So you could look at it and be like, oh, darn, I wasn't, King Arthur, or Guinevere,
Right. Well,
or...
and I'm going to give you a perfect
it's like-
example. One time I had a client. He was a young man. I want to say he was 23, 24, young guy. And he wanted to do a past life regression, which I thought was kind of, well, okay, fine, we did it. He goes back, and he's reliving in some country, maybe it was in the Middle East or something. It was like a village life, very basic, like goat farming, where you lived in a village, okay?
Yep.
And his
Yep.
life was born in that village, lived, married, spent his entire life in that village, because I took him to the point of his death, and he died an old man in his bed. That was
Yep.
it. A very, very uneventful life. And he
Right.
basically lived and died in the same exact little village. So at the end, I was thinking, oh boy, for a 20-something-year-old. And then after he came out, I said, well, let me ask you, what do you felt? And he goes, I understand why I needed to see that. And I was like, okay, I got to hear this. And I said, why? He goes, well, apparently his dad had passed away when he was like a teenager, and he was responsible for his mom and his sister. But his sister was already in the teenage. He goes, the truth is, I'm using my mom and my sister to not go anywhere and do the things I want to do. And I understand that if I keep doing that, my life is going to be like his. That
Yes,
nothing will ever
right.
happen for me.
Yes. Yes.
He saw it. He says, I understand it. It was like, okay, he gets it. Well, like, it was a real dull life. But for him, he understood at that moment why he saw that lifetime as dull as it was. I mean, it was meaningful in the sense it was his life, but nothing really happened.
Right, exactly. And he felt that he wanted to, and his life now is probably a reaction to that he wants to do more,
Yes.
see more, do more. Yeah, no, it's true. And even, I mean, I just think that people have to be open to what, like, if they're asking for the information for a helpful purpose, then they need to be open to what that is. I mean,
Yes.
I had just because of where, like recently a couple people have like reached out to me saying they have Titanic memories too, and hopefully I'll be talking to them. But the one other person in my life that I know who or that I met who had a regression and felt that she was there, she interestingly enough did the regression because she was stuck, because she basically was living in her hometown with her mom. She was afraid to go anywhere. And she felt like she had so much to do, but was just, and then she doom and gloom, and
Oh.
and that to her was just the perfect metaphor. And she learned. She realized that that's why I'm trapped, and I can't. I'm listening to my mother this time, and I'm not doing what I want to do, and I'm resenting it. So after that, she just, from what I understand, she went and she just lived her life. She
Right.
So it can be healing.
Well, people sometimes need also to be prepared to realize that you might see somebody who was really unlikable, or,
Yeah.
or lived a life that you're like, wow, what a crappy life. Hello. Sometimes people are unprepared. Like you're not going to go and have a Gone with the Wind moment. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might have been a crappy person who lived a crappy life.
Yeah.
And that was what happened with you. And
no, it is. I think that's totally true. I mean, what it made me think of with regards to, I had a buddy who was, that I had shared, like certain people in my life who are interested have known about this for years and years and years. Like, this is not news whatsoever. This one guy who I was in touch with, friends for a while, and we lost touch. But back in the day, he had read a book that was written by someone else who had memories of being one of the designers of Titanic. And he had read his book, and he wasn't sure if he believed it or not. And I gave him like early drafts of mine, and he goes, I hate to say this, but I believe you more than him. And I'm like, well, why? And he goes, well, because he's just defending this guy constantly. Like his whole book is sort of, this guy's a hero, and it's all about how saintly he is and how miserable everyone else is. And he goes, I feel like you're more realistic. Like you're
right.
You're not afraid to let the reader not like Jack, because he wasn't always pleasant. And and I just wrote what I saw.
Right.
And also I recognize that I'm not Jack. But yeah, I wrote to my, like he did some crappy things, and I guess I will defend what he did on Titanic, because even though there was a reason for everything that he did,
right?
And he certainly did not try to be a jerk on Titanic, but he had his ego, and he was not great to his dad, and and his family really, and at times, and and I just saw it and I wrote it. And
I think that's great. But really, in truth, if you think about it, Paul, even if, let's say, whether you're recalling a past life or whatever, in truth, human beings are a lot more complex, where, like, that good guy or the bad guy.
Yeah.
If we had somebody that was chronicling our every move, boy, what would come up around, if it came out with everything we said and did.
It's true. No, we don't always present our best selves, and I think that's probably true of every person.
Yes, of course. But it makes life interesting, doesn't it?
It does. Yes.
So anyway, Paul, I wanted to thank you so much. It has been wonderful to interview you. Like I said before, I am very fascinated with this subject, and what you speak about, what you wrote about. Like I said, from my own firsthand experience, it's very, very real. And there's something that, no matter, I can't put it into words. You can describe it, but not until you experience it do you understand it.
Yes.
How convincing, or how it touches your soul, where there's something there that it's like, I know this is true.
Yeah, right. Yeah, anyone who's really digging in, you do get to that place, that point of no return, where you're like,
yes.
I know it's true, that's it. And so,
yes,
why are you mucking around?
You could describe it. You could provide all this proof and all these facts and these correlations and everything. But there's something that only the person that has that firsthand experience, that observation, that know, okay, that's me, or that is me, but not me, kind of thing. And this is not my imagination.
Yep. Yeah.
Because there's certain things that you see while you're in regression that you can't make up because you have no knowledge of it. How's that?
Yeah, right. Totally.
It's like, I'm not digging this up out of my subconscious somewhere. It's like, there's no way I know that. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, Right, like with me with the Titanic blueprints. If
Yes.
I was just such a geek that I had memorized the layout of Titanic, I would have, would have pre-visualized it or visualized
Oh,
it in a way
yeah.
that was erroneous. But I
Yes.
didn't, and frankly found out it was true later. So yeah, no, I agree.
Right. And what your first reaction was like, I'm wrong. Wow, I can't believe I'm wrong. What I kept
Yeah,
thinking that room was there and it's not. I was wrong. Not
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and it
that's
was
the thing.
devastating at the time because I had spent, I had, ended the job. It wasn't a happy experience. I wanted to take some time and just sort of try to figure out if this was true. So I had
Mm-hmm.
already spent a bunch of time like writing up what had happened up to that point, and so yeah, I was all like, "Oh my God, the last few months you have completely wasted. This is baloney." And then,
Wow, that was like really like, oh, okay. So I guess I'll
so
write now a fiction book about it.
yeah, right, exactly. No, exactly. I was like, how embarrassing. And I had some friends saying, well, Paul, it still doesn't make it less valid. And I'm like, well,
For me,
well,
it
in my
does.
mind it does because
Yeah, of course.
what is this saying? And but I can see that. I could see somebody writing a deep psychology like a person who has to prove to themselves that they were on the Titanic. For what reason?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, because it was terrifying. Like, that's how I look at it
Yeah.
is that it was not fun by any means. None of
Do
it.
you
None of that experience was fun. And so I don't know why anyone would just want to be associated with it. I mean, it's terrifying. It's
do
terrifying.
you think that you've lived any other lives between now and then?
I don't know. To tell you the truth, I actually, I will say yes. I will say this. There is, I did one other regression, and I
Okay.
did see a life that was sort of, not a long life, but a life that was between these two. And I actually draw from that in the new book. Like that,
Okay.
that is one of the things that I pull out. So
Wow.
I don't want to totally talk about it, but yes, it was. It was. I can say this. It was a Far East life,
Oh,
and
wow.
what I saw was enough to make me judge the veracity of it.
Okay.
Just because the experience that I had. And in my new book, I give that experience to the main character. I essentially give him, so if one were to read that book and
Right.
understand this regression and this experience, know that it comes from a place of truth for me, so.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Anyway, yeah. There was a time when I thought, oh, maybe I should go there and really try to, but it's not easy getting to China, and
No.
I felt like, hey, I also felt like once you know it's true, it's sort
Yes.
of like, it's like doing cop shows. I
Well,
can say this: cops have a burden beyond figuring out who did it, which is providing an abundance of evidence to make sure that they can be prosecuted beyond a reasonable doubt.
exactly.
So oftentimes in the research for the crime shows that I've worked on, you will have a cop being like, and then I found this, and then I found this. And what I have to say to them is, but what you don't understand is that once you find this, the audience is going to know who did it.
Right.
You don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to the viewer who did it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how I feel about the past life stuff, which is having spent all this time with Jack and with that experience, I don't need to prove it any further. Like, what's the point? Like, I mean, we'll
Right.
put it this way. I guess there are other things to do in life, and time is
Yeah.
short.
Yes.
It's not 25 years short, but still, there's other things I want to do. So, yeah, so I haven't really pursued that other one.
Okay.
And I can say this. I have found more information about a life that was one of the lives that I have memories of that preceded Jack's.
Really?
Probably by a couple hundred years. Yeah. When I had my regression, I saw two lives
Okay.
that time. Like, I basically did check-ins on two different lives, and both were extremely realistic. And I ended up sort of being able to just by luck figure out that one of them existed in the South Seas, but fairly recently I've been able to pinpoint I did another regression. I got more information about this person and what happened. And so I might write in a little addendum to my book, just a little, just about that, because that was fascinating to me, and I felt that, that it was, that his life was worth knowing about. Like, I was kind of afraid of how it ended.
Okay.
So I didn't.
Let's face it.
Yeah, no,
it's whichever way you look at it, our ego's in there somewhere. Like, I don't want to die.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that was how it was. It's kind of a fascinating thing,
I think so.
And I will say this is all right. And if there's, are you editing the show, by the way?
I can edit it though, but go ahead.
Oh no! I just didn't know if we're so beyond time that I.
No, don't worry. I mean, I don't have a time limit. Keep going. Don't worry about that.
All right. Well, what I will say this. I had read something, like on Facebook, I'm members of a couple spiritual groups, and and people will just put up these kind of nice memes, and and I always appreciate that, because sometimes when you're feeling down, whatever. And one of the memes that really struck me that I saw was that your purpose in this life is to heal all of your past lives. So I was like, oh, well, this is kind of interesting. And there was a part of me that knew that I had really walked away from that other life because I was afraid. I was terrified of what I saw, because it was in the South Seas, and what I saw looked like an island raid going wrong, where a bunch of natives were chasing a group that I was in to boats, and they were coming after us, and they just wounded me. And the last when I came out of the regression, they had just speared my leg, but that was it. And so I had to suspect that I ended up, I don't want to say in a pot, but
those natives, if they're in the Polynesians, man, they were into eating their enemies.
Believe me, they were. Yeah, no. So there was a part of me, and also I didn't
that's
really.
Pretty.
Yeah, and I felt like, maybe he was just raiding, and this was just something that they did, and the guys, like, I didn't understand the circumstances by what I saw. I just simply saw my back to some boats and then being captured. And seeing the boat, like I was so eager to get the boat off. Like and one of the last images I saw was the boat being like pushing the boat so it gets away. And I didn't really, So while I saw that right before I saw Jack's life, and my book goes into really all the Jack stuff. It was something that made me wonder, like that other life. But I didn't really think about it. I thought, well, maybe he was just, if he was a schmuck raiding someone's island and he got his just desserts, like I was dismissing him. I was like, he's like a red shirt on Star Trek, like, oh,
it's like, he's going to die, right?
yeah, he's going to die. We know he dies. That's it. So I hadn't really thought of him, but what was really fascinating was I was doing a meditation, and it was when I was sort of reaching back to Jack around that time when I thought it was important to just kind of do healing there. And when I read this thing, it was like, your goal is to heal all of your lives. And I was like, oh, wow, that's actually a really cool thing. And, now that I know about chakras and heart chakras, I know that I can kind of just sort of send, good thoughts and good energy from my heart chakra to these people. So what I did was I sent it to Jack, and I felt the usual response. And then I sent it to this guy, and all I knew was this one little moment of his life that I saw. And he came back at me.
Really?
And sent me, And it turns out that the story was way different than I thought. He was not a red shirt. He was a healer and really kind of a spiritual leader. I mean, on his island, they were kind of both. And his dad was like the king, and and basically what I thought was a raid was not that. It was he was relocating his people. And the king on the island they went to reneged on the deal and killed his son, and so he was trying to escape and trying to basically help his wife and his baby escape. And it was just, it was just really potent. And I saw enough when I did this regression about his life to basically be able to figure out the island. And,
wow.
I mean, and it holds up because the reason they had to relocate was that a Westerner's ship, actually a Dutch explorer ship, had crashed on the island, and it brought with it these black rats that were destroying. And basically that people were dying, so they had to find a new island home. And his son went as an emissary, made a deal, and then it was reneged upon when they showed up. And, they tried to escape and were chased away. So, he died not knowing.
People don't realize that in a lot of those South Sea islands that you talk about, they were, let me tell you something, you were lucky if they just killed you. They were pretty vicious with their prisoners. Especially the male ones.
They were, and they did, and I think he did end up getting consumed as well.
Yeah.
I still,
Right, it was like... it was pretty out there.
Some did. His tribe didn't. What was interesting that as I did this regression, what was fascinating to me was, we had always heard of the fact that they had these sort of religious platforms where they presumed that people were, like sacrificed to the gods and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, what he explained to me on his island, because, and by the way, what was interesting about him is he was darker. He was living among Polynesians.
Okay.
But he was more like a Melanesian. Like he and his people were darker skinned, complected.
Okay.
I think they had intermingled years earlier. So he wasn't full Polynesian. He was kind of more, more African mixture at Polynesian.
And what's really interesting is that they're discovering, that's really interesting that you say about that, Paul. You know that they're discovering in those islands that where they had originally thought that it was only Polynesians who had settled there.
Yes.
It was not really. They had a lot of other sources from that area that ended up in those islands.
Yes. Well, no, exactly. And funny enough, this island that I discovered, Takapoto is the name of the island. It's an atoll. It's an atoll or atoll. I don't know how that's pronounced. But they are looking at that island as as having they found evidence of previous inhabitants of an unknown heritage or origin. And I'm like, because they were Melanesian and they didn't get along with the locals, and that's why they had to kind of travel far to find a new island. But the black rats did kind of wipe out their village. So I saw so many details, and so that story I will write up.
That is so interesting. Oh,
yeah, and it is fascinating because, it's things like that where I was like, I could see the island, I could see where the ship was, because the island had a coral jetty, like, it had a coral ring around it. Like, basically these atolls were all just coral. Mm-hmm. This one has a lagoon, which is kind of famous now for black pearl farming or pearl farming.
Wow.
But one of the interesting things that I saw in my regression was at his wedding, I saw him on a boat, and he would go, like there was a part of the island where they had the marriage hut or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And, where people could go and, because people basically lived, at least on his island, people lived all in proximity to each other.
Right.
So for special occasions, they would go away, and they did that on their marriage. And so I saw him on this boat, and I'm thinking, what was that? And then I discovered on this particular island there was a lagoon. So you could take a boat to get to the get across the island.
Mm-hmm.
And I also saw this ship crashed on what looked like the end of a jetty. Like it's rocks, coral rocks going out to sea, and this boat is like speared on the end of it. And I saw the rats come, and I saw all this, and by boat I mean big sailing ship. And so anyway, I found this island, Takapoto, where it was discovered by it was visited by the discoverer of Eastern Island, a Dutch explorer, and his ship had crashed. And where the wreckage is, according to recent maps, is right at the end of like this rock jetty that I saw. That he was trying to find access to the lagoon on the island. to with as safe harbor, but this canoes and very small boats can navigate between, the inner lagoon and the outer.
Exactly.
But a big ship like that, forget about it. So he was trying to find a place to, and they drove up on the rocks, and the ship sank, and it's still there. So that to me was like, whoa, this is, and the fact that, this island has an unknown heritage, and, and I could see the plants. But what I was starting to say is that they had altars too. But what was very fascinating to me, and what I saw in my regression, was that these altars were used it's where people came into the world and left it. And they were very much like spiritually aware. The stars were kind of the gods sort of thing. And a lot of what they did was at night, that the days were very hot and, they were kind of more night explorer types. But anyway, they would when a woman was going to give birth, they would lay out all the banana plants on this thing, and the baby would come into the world, and the bodies would be cremated on these things when they left.
Okay, so that's how they took care of the dead.
They did in practice, and they would use like cocoa, what do you call it? The stuff from the coconuts, the coconut meat, as kind of accelerant. And so that was where. So I think that from what I saw, it wasn't a case of them, like, sacrificing people on these altars. It was part of their culture where they celebrated life and the return to the other side.
Yeah, so, right. And all these, they were saying that, that's why some of these groups, sometimes they had different, I guess, religious or spiritual beliefs, even though they kind of lived in that area, and that's their thinking is that they had brought them from where they originated from.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that these were the beliefs of this guy. So if there were cannibalism in the other islands among the Polynesians, maybe, but he made it clear to me that his beliefs were this, and and I found it fascinating. And I think maybe because you do find these altars all over those islands, and everyone seems to think. I mean, people understand that they have cultural significance, but no one quite knows what they mean. And, at least on this island, this is what I saw. And,
I mean, even now they're still trying to figure out stuff about Easter Island that they still haven't quite. I mean, they have figured out a lot of stuff as to what happened with the people that lived there, but what they did and how they did the thing with those faces, they still can't figure out how they did it, the mechanics of it anyway.
It would be great if somebody like in a past life could come up back with that information. I'm pretty sure that people, that would be really cool.
That's a big mystery.
Because I didn't go looking for this guy's story. I mean, I didn't go looking to solve any mysteries of Polynesia. It's not something that even more than the Titanic. I did have a dark fascination with, obviously, since I heard about it. But this one. The island stuff, no, there was no interest whatsoever. I don't like the beach.
Exactly.
I mean, when I was a child, I didn't like the beach. Like now, as an adult, I go and take photos of the beach, and I like it.
And that's one of the things. Everybody thinks that you're magically attracted to certain things about a past life, and not necessarily. You could be like, I don't like that, I don't want that. And I'm not talking about as in a negative, like what happened with you with the shadow of the building. It could just be if you had negative experiences in a lifetime. It doesn't have to be horrific. You could have a dislike for it, and you might not understand why, but I think that's true, and I think that the island life, knowing some of the way it ended badly, it made it so that I was just like, of my top places, not so much, like of interest, not so much, and that I think is right, because I feel like something bad did happen at the end of this life, but what I'm fascinated by. And I want to do more meditations, and so that's why this other one might end up being a book, would be to try to find out how he did his healing, like what are those techniques that he used, and obviously some of it was plant-based and all that, but I would just love to sort of be able to, sort of bring back that information of, how did these people, these medicine men, heal? What did they do? Yeah, because back then we're talking about here, basic. And I think a better understanding of how our mind influences what happens in our body.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, because back then it was like, yeah, maybe you had some use of herbs if there were any, or whatever grew
Yep.
in that area, you know,
Yep.
as for certain medicinal purposes. But I think a lot of it was a
Yep.
better understanding of what happens in the
Yes.
mind.
No, no, you're right. You're right. And also, I've been giving some tips, meditative tips for things that they had this one. They did have a significance, a great significance in this particular community, with the dog star with Sirius. Feeling like that was a very powerful, like of the night sky. That will
Okay.
obviously being a bright star was very powerful, and it has powerful healing properties. And
Yes.
so I was told that, and just sort of imagine Sirius kind of coming in through the crown and going to the problem areas and working them out. Like that's is a
Yes.
lot of the healing stuff is as you know, visualizations and all that.
Oh,
And
yes.
I think that he did that. Where I saw his dad was he became sort of this leader because his dad was killed by a shark on the
Oh my
beach,
God.
and
Oh,
he was very upset that he couldn't save him. So yeah, there were things that traumas that they couldn't heal from, but a
yes.
lot of things they could do.
Well, I mean, case in point, just look at the studies done on placebo effect. I mean, if
Yeah.
anybody wants to doubt how powerful the mind is, look at
Yeah, well,
placebo
no,
studies.
exactly. And I think part of it is that these guys were tapping into that, and it makes sense, at least, and again, for me, I was looking at everything I was seeing critically. It makes sense that he would not have had any medicine to fight the diseases the rats brought. Like these were Western
Exactly.
diseases that they had not, and I do have proof that there was a massive eradication campaign, I think in the 70s on this island, 70s or 80s, because, it was known to be, it obviously was a lucrative place for the French government in terms
Right.
of the pearl mining and all that. I mean,
Okay.
the pearl farming, and,
Uh-huh.
it didn't do to have rats running around, so there was a massive eradication program there. And,
Wow.
but this came
And
from,
usually what happens is with these ancient cultures, when they not like when they had either sickness introduced, like all of a sudden like dropped in on you, but usually when it's happened, because sometimes you do, they learned how to quarantine, but usually it was a slower effect where, let's
yeah,
say, some of your villages or the people next in the village got sick, and
yeah,
they learned how to quarantine, and they realized, hey, once you
yeah.
quarantine, that's it. But if you
Yeah,
get
no,
something
no,
like
exactly,
rats,
exactly, and that's why it was very important for these people to find a new place,
yeah.
And I think that after that, other islands did extend over there. The Polynesians did come there, but I believe that this unknown, sort of heritage that it's a fascinating island where they're finding out that it wasn't just Polynesians, and there's an interesting
Exactly.
culture that lived there. And like I said, I believe I know what that culture was.
Yes.
And
And
it's
I would love to, because I'm telling you, they're saying that that the history of those islands as far as human habitation far predates
yeah,
what they originally thought as far
yeah,
as
yeah. No,
estimates.
exactly. Yeah. No,
So,
I think ours, these guys were fairly right, exactly, because they believed. Yeah, they were saying there were all these theories that they came from. I mean, some people even saying come from Hawaii, but
yes, but
coming from
I've,
like
I've heard of China, I've heard of
yeah,
South
and
America off the
coming
coast
like
of
in the
Peru.
like at the year 1,000 or whatever, and it's like I don't think that's true in all cases, and I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
there were cultures there before, and I think that
I've
yeah,
even
they were
heard
unhappy
and
alliances.
like I've heard that on some of these islands they have even because they would do a lot of the rock carvings.
Yep,
They have
yep,
even found some carvings that resemble like Celtic designs,
yeah.
which is like, okay, so where
Oh
did this
wow.
come from? So-
Yeah, no, that's pretty something. Well, I think that I mean, one of the points that I make in the new book is that, and it's something that I usually tell people, is that so many of the original cultures of the earth had similar beliefs.
yes.
Like if you look at just the broad picture of the idea of humans living and being reincarnated,
Mm-hmm.
that culture, I mean, the Celts, Obviously the Chinese, the Pacific Islanders. Like, it's a rogues gallery of every culture. India for sure.
Yes.
Germany had their version of it. The Zoroastrians, all of West Africa, and several Native American tribes.
Yes.
The Huron
exactly.
and others. And it's just like I look at it as like it's the default spiritual understanding of the world. And when the Abrahamic religions came in, they kind of like knocked it out. But the reality is that, how is it that all these cultures believe more or less the same thing? And that, to me, I think, is where the truth lies.
Exactly, because what people don't realize is that straight belief in reincarnation or variants of it, that everybody thinks, well, if you're going to get another shot, the idea was always that you have such a great life that you don't have to reincarnate. That's the whole.
Right.
That's the winning thing.
Well, no, exactly, and that's the spiritual message of a lot of the Eastern religions. Like you get to that place of, but like even the Egyptians. I mean, it's a rogues gallery. If you look at all the cultures in the history of the earth, that it's amazing how many really truly believed it. And so, the imagery of the Druids finding its way to the South Pacific. If they have similar beliefs, they could have similar imagery. Like it's not that far of a stretch.
Right.
I think
cultures were not as isolated as once believed, but anyway, Paul, thank you again so much. It has been
you're welcome.
absolutely
I really enjoyed
wonderful.
This was a lot of fun.
I have enjoyed this so much. You have no idea, and I want to wish you the best of luck on your project. On all of them.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'll just tell people. I mean, the book is called "The Man Who Sent the SOS."
Yes. I've been showing slides with the cover of the book, so that people know what it looks like. They've been seeing once they see the video portion of the show, they're going to see I put a cover of your book. Plus, I'm going to put a link to your website on the credits of the show as well.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. So,
but anyway, for the podcast listeners, what is your?
So any questions or, I'll be happy to answer. I just enjoy hearing what people think. So,
Paul, what's your website address for anybody that's listening to the podcast?
Oh, version? Sure. It is my name. You can do themanwhosentthesos.com.
Okay.
Or you can do paulamirault.com. And I think you pronounced it the French way, which is great. It should be Amirault. But my granddaddy Americanized it when he came in the 30s or the 20s. So, but yes, it's just PAULAMIRAULT.com.
Perfect. Fantastic. Again, I want to wish you the best of luck in everything.
Thanks.
It sounds like you have so many wonderful, interesting projects that I hope to bring you back and we can
really
talk about those.
It was just really great to talk to you. And
okay.
I'll let you know when the book comes out.
Yes. I'll keep an eye out for it.
But we're looking at early September. So
okay, early September.
So we'll
okay. All right, Paul. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Man, what a great interview. Of course, because I love all my guests because, of course, that's why I wouldn't ask them to come to the show if I didn't think that they were wonderful, interesting. But reincarnation and all these things having to do with hypnosis, they have a special place in my heart. Why? Because I've experienced it in my hand, but mostly I have done it. I have been the hand holder, if you want to call it that, for people that wanted to do the hypnosis, the past life regression. And I wasn't kidding. A lot of times people go in there very scared, and I had to basically first do a putting them under hypnosis part so that they realize they're not going to float off into outer space or disappear, or I don't know. People come up with weird ideas. But anyway, I have been there. And by the way, it was for somebody that's not really used to it, they sometimes kind of have a hard time stopping the over-analysis, okay? Which is where, part of the process of regressing somebody is that you have to let go, like suspend your disbelief. Stop over analyzing, like, how did I get there? What, how, what. It's just like, it's almost like, okay, if you go in now to see a movie at the theater, do you at the beginning of the movie say, I want to know how, what, where, when, and what happened to that character? You sit there and you watch it and you let it unfold. Even the biggest fantasy, what I'm saying is that you suspend your disbelief, you let it unfold, you enjoy it. So that's one of the things that would hang up a lot of people for past life regressions, because they wanted all the details. They wanted to see the ending credits at the beginning. It's like, no, 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 don't do that. Stop. Just let go, which for some people is really hard. Let go and watch and experience it. And the see part was really difficult for a lot of people because they wanted to see with their eye, even though they were closed, and it was like, see, appear. So that's another thing. But eventually, once people let go of that whole tight thing that they got going on, they let go, and it's like, let it unfold. Don't question if it sounds weird or what, or if you look down at your feet and all of a sudden you're a guy but you're wearing heels, then you were a woman. Go with it. Go with it. Just like if you're watching a movie. That's usually the biggest hiccup that I would find with people that would come to see me for past life regression, where they wanted to overanalyze, and it was really funny because it's almost like they were afraid of being foolish. They were afraid of seeing or believing something, and it was like, I'm not gonna talk about it, and you're not gonna talk. I mean, you talk to whoever you want. As a matter of fact, I would tape the regression. I send them a copy of it so that they could keep it and go back over it, because a lot of times later on things would click for them. But they're afraid of being foolish, and it's like, let go of that. Like that. Like, oh, that's stupid. How can you get rid of that? Just get rid of it. Again, I want to go to the example of if you go see some fantasy movie and you had some guy saying, "Well, that's a bunch of bull crap. How can that be happening? That doesn't exist." Or, "How's that?" And stop the chatter. Stop that critical factor that wants to understand and overanalyze everything. And you'd be surprised. And one of the things and I point this out because I know some people that they were expecting when I was telling it, because inevitably, let's face it, most souls have had dramatic or weird or mind-boggling lives because of the sheer number of lifetimes they might have experienced. But the most important thing, which is what I would tell them, well, afterwards, is, when we would say, well, let's show this person what's the most appropriate thing for them to see. I would say 90% of the time, they would get shown a lifetime that they had no idea, no affiliation with anything, the time period, the country, the person, nothing. They were like, huh? And, every once in a while you had somebody who would drive, but most of the times it was regular lives. And even if they did not really die as old people, they would die of sickness or illness, like on a bed. Nothing like really horrible where you were getting decapitated or killed or whatever. People, of course, are, that whole type thing was always they think that they were going to go on this roller coaster ride where they were going to see themselves. And I tell them, this is the thing. Your psyche, your subconscious, your mind will always protect you at all costs. In other words, your mind, your subconscious mind understands what your logical or regular conscious mind doesn't understand, that sometimes to introduce you into that ability to relive and see again an experience you had as a different person but the same soul, believe it or not, that takes a bit to square in your head. So what your subconscious mind does is it's like, I'm going to give you something really tame. Okay? Because if I really give you the hard, ugly lifetimes, you might go, ah! and that's it. You're out of there. In other words, there's no benefit. The subconscious understands there's no benefit to showing you a lifetime that you are not ready to handle, especially with modern day sensibilities that we have as human beings living in modern day, where, you know, people died sometimes horrifically, very commonly, like what he was describing. Your dad goes, I gets eaten by a shark. Now, something like that makes the headlines in the National Enquirer, but let's face it, not that many people die that way. But back then, many years ago, depending on how far back we're going, that type of violent or sudden death could be very common and could affect, either happen to you or somebody you knew. But from the perspective of the observer, which is the person in modern day, all those things would be really, really shocking and possibly disturbing. And of course, everybody has a different threshold of where they go, you know, and the difference is, even though there's a lot of methods that you can do as a hypnotist to draw the person into observer mode, as much as what you're looking at is a movie, there is that understanding that what you're seeing happening is you. Okay, now imagine it. You go see a movie nowadays where somebody gets killed or blown up or slasher film or God knows, whatever. And this is a movie, and you know it's made up, it was produced, a lot of CGI, whatever. And you still go, or whatever. Now, can you imagine if you're watching a movie where sometimes you even smell what it smelled like there, or even felt a breeze or the heat? That's how lifelike it is. To see that person that you know is you, but a different body, experience some horrific death. There's a lot of people that can't handle that with modern day sensibilities. Sometimes, depending, again, everybody's different, they will see something that they need to see to get them beyond a certain problem that they have, that their soul understands it, but they don't. Something that they got caught on that hamster wheel. They can't get off the hamster wheel. And this person now in modern day, in this present life, can't quite figure out why they react the way they do to certain stimuli, certain things, And again, those people that want to do the past life regression, whether you want to believe it or not, don't be surprised if at the beginning you really do not have these past life moments that knock your socks off. You'll be like, really? Because your mind is, and I've had a lot of clients also that told me once they had that past life regression, then they would have some really way out dreams. And that's the subconscious going, okay, all right, we put you, we dipped you in the water, and we're going to throw some stuff at you now. Your subconscious is talking to you symbolically in symbols. Some of the stuff is way out there, especially if you're talking another time, place, person. We could go on with that. But again, now you know why I find it so fascinating. And I hope to have Paul back and see his follow-up projects. Again, his website's going to be on the credits of the show. If you want to find out more about Paul, what he's doing, his book, future projects. And guys, I hope you like the show. I have a ton of fascinating guests coming that are going to be great. They're going to be great interviews. They're all just super interesting people. A lot of interesting stuff going on with them, whether they're an author, an expert, and my true believers calling all true believers. Don't forget about me. Send me your stories. I've got a lot of stories lined up. Go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. There's a submit your story tab, or not, write an email, Marlene@MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You can write me. You can write the story if you're a writer. If you want to video yourself, you can send me. That's fine. If you want to talk about it, you can send that. And if you really want to get interviewed, just let me know, and I will find out some way I can do it on the phone, just like I do with my regular guests. I can Skype it, and we can talk about it. You can tell me your story. Don't worry. Like Paul said, I can edit stuff, so it'll, I can take out any flubs, and we'll talk about it. It's a conversation. So again, do not forget about me. My true believers, like I said, I'm working on season 5 of Stories of the Supernatural. And as much as I love to talk to experts and authors and people out there, I absolutely love talking to the regular people that have had sometimes one experience, sometimes a lifetime of experiences. So whatever it is that you're willing to share, I'm willing to listen. So don't forget about me. Catch me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Miami Ghost Chronicles. That's where I live stream. And again, guys, I want to thank you so much for sharing this time with me. And I hope you come back, subscribe to the channel so you get notified of any new shows that I release. But again, thank you so very much for being part of my audience. Take care. You're all wonderful.